Welcome back, everyone. In this last module of the week, I'm going to introduce to you the mobile-first approach to website design. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that these days our society is mobile-first. Most of our touch points with any brand and any service happens on our mobile devices. We walk around with the most powerful computer that most of us have ever seen in our pockets every single day. Most of our touch points start on the mobile device, and a lot of times they end on them. But for a lot of consumers and a lot of people in business, still feel comfortable making larger transactions on their desktop devices. But when we create interfaces for the web, we really need to think about that lowest common denominator, the smallest viewport size, which is usually our mobile cell phone. And the reason why we think about mobile first as a more appropriate approach for creating screens is because we're mobile everywhere. 84% of the time we're at home on our mobile devices, 80% during miscellaneous time, 74% waiting in lines, and 64% we're mobile at work. Now, that doesn't mean every person who's at work is on their cell phone 64% of the time. I really hope not. But we get into the habit of getting used to specific ways of doing processes, like checking our emails or checking social channels, texting, writing notes. A lot of those things now happen on mobile devices even when we're at work. The partial attention that we experience while using mobile devices has changed the way that we design things. When most people use their mobile device, they're scanning, they're scrolling, and they have partial attention on the content and the function, which means that we need to create content that's more snackable and scannable than we did before. That habitual experience also has bled over to desktop computer use. When it comes to a mobile-first design approach, there are a lot of things we need to consider. And it starts in wireframes. We need to start thinking about how content can be different. Whether it's the length of our content or copy, or the length of our headings, or different media like images and video. Content can be different across platforms. Layouts also need to be considered when thinking about a mobile-first approach. Whereas on a more narrow device like a cell phone, your layout can be single column, the grid needs to adjust into something larger for larger viewport sizes. Images need to be considered mostly because of mobile network speeds. It's much better to optimize your images to the smallest size possible so that your mobile users can load them faster. Touch sensitivity is also something to consider seriously. We need to query for devices that actually can adapt and use touch in the right way. And navigation might change when we change viewport sizes. Navigation on mobile devices is limited by the amount of screen size. Most of the time, navigation is positioned off canvas, so off of the viewable area, or it's shorter and more concise because there's less room to show it. Certain things like forms need to have special consideration. I'm sure none of you have used a form on a mobile device and decided it was amazing. Forms on mobile devices need to be a little more concise and should be segmented in a way that allows for the content to be digested easily. Another consideration is third-party apps. A lot of the times when you incorporate third-party applications into your interface, they may not be mobile responsive. I'm sure you've all encountered a modal window or a pop-up, that's just a word that's interchangeable there, that has taken over your mobile screen and blocked the ability to scroll up or down. That is such a common thing even today that I really encourage you to try to find mobile responsive and specific things like notifications. Do away with the pop-up entirely if you can, and come up with another convention like a slide-up tray modal window or something that slides down from the top. I don't really care what it is as long as it doesn't block the entire mobile viewport screen. Another consideration around maps specifically is whether you're going to use a static map or a dynamic map. Now these days mobile phone networks are a lot faster than they used to be, but still the difference between loading a static map of a location for a store, for example, versus a dynamic map, one that you can scroll around within, is the difference between about 17 kilobytes and 350 kilobytes. So it's something to keep in mind. Do you really need an interactive scrollable map to show the location of one of your stores? Inputs and outputs need to be considered as well. If you have a function that needs an input, like taking a photo or uploading a document, you need to consider whether the device can actually do that. On mobile phones, of course, yes, we can take photos, we can scan things, we can use the capabilities of our devices in specific ways. But those inputs may not be the same on a desktop computer, a laptop computer, a tablet. Outputs have the same limitations. Some users may not be able to save files or download specific content onto their mobile devices, whereas on desktop computers, those things are easy to do. This may seem like a simple one, but buttons need to change on different viewport sizes and on different hardware devices. Meaning that the idea of on hover doesn't exist when you're dealing with a touch device. So a state of a button needs to look like it can be touched and interacted with, because there is no mouse to hover over it. Also, the sizes of buttons, the juxtaposition of buttons next to specific elements need to change. They can't be side by side anymore like they are on desktop on a mobile device. This is something a little more complicated to think about, but a user flow, an actual journey, might change based on the device itself. The best example of this is in a sequential flow, where you'll be able to fit more information on a desktop device and thereby create a convention that reveals information from one column to the next. But we won't have the same ability to do that on mobile devices. You really just have one long scrolling window. So a lot of times in sequential flows, we take that information and we specifically isolate it and then allow the user to move to the next piece of information. And I'm sure there are many more things to consider when looking at different viewport sizes. And that brings us to the end of this week and the end of this module, where I'm going to leave you with a challenge and an exercise to complete. I need you to perform a responsive evaluation of the following two sites, georgebrown.ca and senecacollege.ca, two post-secondary education institutions. What I'd like you to do is to look for specific changes in layout, copy, images, and navigation, and maybe other things. This will allow you to take a look at specific changes. This will give you a little more of an in-depth view of how responsive web design adjusts our online experiences. Now, you may need to take a look at the experience on a mobile device when evaluating the lowest common denominator viewport size. But don't forget there are built-in tools in most web browsers that will allow you to change the width of your browser. In Google Chrome specifically, there are developer tools that will allow you to change the width of your viewport size. So I hope you've enjoyed this week's lesson, the first part of the skeleton plane. Next week, we're going to dive into the other elements of the skeleton plane that will help you complete your deliverable, the wireframes. We'll see you next week, everyone.